Sometimes you feel like you do not belong somewhere, or you're not qualified enough for something. Or maybe you feel like you simply do not deserve what you have achieved. And what happens often is that the imposter, it loves that kind of territory. It steps in, it, spreads out its stuff, and it basically tells you that, yeah, you don't belong here. Yeah, you're not good enough to be here. Why are you even here? Now, this is just a very common example of how imposter syndrome works. And imposter syndrome can really translate in all kinds of different ways. But oftentimes, it's all about kind of the feeling of not belonging, not being good enough, not being qualified enough, not deserving something. And all of those feelings always leads back to the same core problem, which has to do with weak self-worth, not being able to validate yourself, negative self-talk, and just self-doubt in general. But can I tell you something? It is normal because we all feel like that. But for some odd reason, because it's not something we really talk about, it gets kind of brushed under the carpet as something that kind of doesn't exist. So then you feel like, I must be the only one who feels like I'm not good enough at this, or I'm not qualified enough, or I don't belong. And then because I'm the only one, I'm going to mess up, or people are going to discover this somehow, and there's going to be a major embarrassment happening. Well, no, not after you watch this video, because I'm going to help you with all of that. The first thing you have to do is to acknowledge the fact that you have it. The next step in battling imposter syndrome is really to understand the triggers. What's triggering your feeling of not being good enough, of not belonging, of not being qualified, or not deserving something? But I want you to really go down the memory lane, because oftentimes negative experiences in our lives have influenced us and created these kind of bad habits in our heads that then are crippling us. Oftentimes it happens in early stages of life, like childhood, teenage years. But if you go down the memory lane, I want you to really think about it. In the early stages of your life, when did you feel good about yourself? And think about, when did you feel bad about yourself? Now, what happens often for people with imposter syndrome is that we certainly do remember the bad times, when we felt bad about ourselves, or when somebody told us we were bad, or some situation made us feel embarrassed or pointed out that we were flawed in one way or another. Obviously, that is part of being human, but sometimes that doesn't get processed properly, or sometimes you have a lot of that happen in your life so that it becomes a buildup to the point that it later comes and haunts you in your life. Like in this case, it comes out as imposter syndrome. And then I want you to actually ask yourself, was it true that you didn't belong? Was it true that you weren't smart enough or good enough or something else? Was it really, really true? In this kind of process, you actually start separating yourself from imposter syndrome, and that creates a healing effect. I'm not saying this is now going to cure and remove all your thoughts, but it's definitely a good start. What you must also be aware of, and I would like to ask you a question. Guess what imposter syndrome actually is? Well, it's actually just dysfunctional self-talk. Yes, I'm sorry to tell you, but you have a bunch of delusional thoughts that are not true, that are playing tricks with your mind. But what's happening is that you have this maybe insecurity where you think like, oh, but maybe I'm not smart, let's say. So then what happens is that your brain starts seeking out evidence called confirmation bias that supports that thought, that basically shows you evidence that, aha, I told you so. Just because you weren't able to quickly calculate how much is, 10 times 3, you're not smart enough. Here you go, that's your evidence. And so what happens is that when we have this negative self-talk, we start internalizing all kinds of random things. And we start believing all this randomness that's happening in our head. I mean, honestly, please do not trust everything that's happening here. You cannot trust this little machine, even though it's a very sophisticated machine. But please know that this machine doesn't have a filter. We go through life and we are fed with all kinds of information, left, right, center, and there's no filter. There's nothing that protects or separates the good, the bad, the ugly. So instead, you might be absorbing things that are not really good for you, that are not really true, that are maybe of toxic nature. And then you're being influenced by it. And unfortunately, what happens is that we don't question enough these thoughts. We basically believe every little thought that happens there. What also happens that we must be so careful with is that our surroundings are also feeding us information. Information that might not always be accurate, might be of toxic nature, might be negative in general. We are cohabiting on this planet Earth with a lot of people who might not always be of positive nature. Let's be polite. And what these people are going to do is that they're going to purposefully push you down, because they're insecure deep down themselves. And so they might be spreading their negativity by saying like, yeah, what, you don't belong here. Or maybe you enter a room and they look up and down on you on purpose to intimidate you, to make you feel like crap, to freeze you out so that you feel intimidated. There are a lot of negative tactics that people do. And unfortunately, what happens with people who are sensitive or has a weak sense of self is that we actually start internalizing that as evidence that, okay, that means I am an imposter. If, these people are looking at me like, what am I doing here when I enter a room? That's probably because I don't belong there, that I'm an imposter. Gosh, I have to go. I have to leave the room ASAP. But no, please don't. What you do is that you work through it. You stay with those uncomfortable feelings. You become aware with your self-awareness that this is your imposter talking. Every time you get that feeling or that thought that is of imposter nature, rule number 1, pull out from your toolkit, from your little arsenal, and ask yourself, is that really true? And if the imposter syndrome now starts having a conversation with you, trying to give you evidence, you simply stay with your self-awareness and see the evidence for what it is. Confirmation bias. A few mistakes doesn't define us. Now, unfortunately, I have to give you a little bit of bad news, but don't freak out, because there is a solution. Imposter syndrome seldom plays alone, okay? It's almost like they come in pairs or as triplets or quadruples. But usually imposter syndrome is not going to be like the only thing that you have an issue with. Oftentimes, people with imposter syndrome might be of perfectionistic nature, or they have really weak sense of self, really poor self-worth. Maybe they have even experienced trauma in the past. And that is something that is very important to understand, that sometimes you can, let's say, read a book on imposter syndrome or watch a video like mine. It might not solve all your problems, because what's maybe happening is that there is something so deep-rooted, so much more significant that stems from trauma that you potentially have to spend quite a long time on working out. And maybe you might also have to do that with a professional therapist. Now, I'm not a therapist, even though I know I'm sitting a bit in a therapy chair. I'm here to just give you guidance, so make sure you subscribe for more guidance and advice on this channel. We're literally just getting started. I remember in therapy when I uncovered, Pandora's box, everything that's wrong with me or flawed with me. I'm like, seriously? I have that many issues? But you know what? Even though it might feel daunting and difficult and like a big challenge that feels overwhelming, don't worry, because once you start fixing one thing, the other one kind of follows, and then it's like a little domino. But what is very, very important at this stage is that you are aware of there might be cousins to your imposter: perfectionism, self-doubt, weak self-worth, insecurities, coping strategies from trauma, comparison games, you name it. Start opening up for those subjects and start gaining information on those subjects. Because what is the ultimate healer that you're gonna learn as you're doing the self-discovery journey is that, well, first and foremost, you have to educate yourself on, these problem areas. Then you have to work with your self-awareness, recognizing when it's happening within you. And then automatically you start detaching yourself from this kind of autopilot behavior that we oftentimes do when we are stuck in a negative loop of some sort. But with self-awareness, you're able to break patterns. And that is the secret to healing. The more content you consume, the more you speak about your issues, which is why therapy is wonderful for this. The more you are self-aware. The less you consume content, the less you speak about it, the more you forget about it and the less self-aware you are. So it is fundamental for the healing work that you do that you're not just, forgetting about, let's say, this issue of imposter syndrome. No, you have to be very aware of it now. You have to recognize yourself. You have to catch yourself doing it. Focus on also accepting yourself as imperfect. That is very, very important because that actually leads us to our authentic self. When we do not put too much pressure on ourselves, we strive to be, the best we can, but we know that we can't be perfect and we are not trying to become perfect. And why I'm bringing authenticity up is because when authenticity exists, there is no imposter syndrome because you're able to validate yourself, you're able to accept yourself the way you are, and you're not holding yourself to some perfectionistic standards. You go to a new workplace and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm new and I'm probably going to make a few mistakes and it's okay. I'm really going to try my best. And so when you are working with all these tools that I mentioned to you, especially self-awareness, especially educating yourself and keep feeding yourself with information and go on a journey of self-discovery. Please, let me tell you, this is where healing happens. I've done this journey now for over 8 years. I'm not perfect, but I have healed so many deep-rooted issues that I thought to myself, it's impossible to heal this. But I want to tell you, you can change anything you want. You can really heal yourself from within. That is possible. And I'm going to be here chatting to you. So make sure you subscribe. And if you want to get more deeper training on leveling up, then go to levelupclass.com where I will be offering masterclasses on all kinds of interesting subjects. Now, thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time.